Hi, once again, I'm Sydney, and I am a servant of the Almighty God. Continuing the series on recognizing God's omnipotence, this episode I want to focus on something I call Sydney's hypothesis. Kind of self-serving, but I think it's kind of something I had to put out there, again, based on my scientific background, loving science. And being a software engineer for many years, it's all about being logical and understanding that, that's kind of the process, right? So I have this hypothesis that I will put out there that goes like this. The existence of governing principles, understood or not, that enables the accurate prediction of result or outcomes nullifies any notion of random in the associated activity. What this basically means is, if anything we do, anything we observe, right, in nature, and when I think of nature, I think of the manifestation of God's omnipotence. Anything that we observe that can be repeated. So we see something, we may not understand the principles or whatever the laws that govern it, but that activity is repeatable, because when we can simulate it and we can predict the outcome, then that activity obviously is not random, because random means basically it cannot be predicted and it cannot be repeated. You cannot, if it's random, you can't say, well, I'm going to generate the same event over and over. So the fact that we can observe something and recognize that we may not understand the laws that govern it. As an example, long before we understood gravity, we always knew that we can drop something, it will fall. So we knew that there was there was a principle governing that force. Now, we didn't know the acceleration due to gravity, how fast that something fell, and the forces, friction and air resistance and all these things that impact it. But we knew just by observing it. So even though we did not understand the laws that govern it, we can observe that. And that is important because with our advanced intelligence, right, we can observe patterns. If we go out there, you go out into the desert and you just see, dunes and just seemingly distributed randomly, we can say, yeah, that's random. The wind blew and things just flew wherever. But we know that when we see straight lines and angles, 90-degree angles, and we see that being repeated, we understand, yes, there is some intelligence. There are patterns we can observe. And this is important because our science is revealing to us that even at the subatomic level, there are forces, and we can recognize that there are these things we can actually observe, and now we can measure. So we know that they are governing rules, because these forces are not random. They are fixed. We can say, okay, this is how much energy you need to break this bond within this, these molecules. And so we understand that we did not place those things there, but there are patterns, there are governing rules that apply to all of that. So even within the subatomic, and when I talk about, us being granted via Dmitri Mendeleev the periodic table of elements, we realize now there are patterns there. So that isn't the periodic table, there is nothing random there. And we observe this. And when I'll go into a lot of, things that we observe, living things, living organisms and plants and animals, we will see patterns, and we have not re-evaluated or actually taken another look at this whole concept of random evolution, because that is what this hypothesis is about. That when there are governing rules, and we can that those rules enable us to predictably produce certain outcomes, that means that activity cannot be associated with random. And right now, you may even hear of what we call this thing, they're calling like predictive evolution, or directed evolution. And this is something that's happening right now, where scientists, our current, genius scientists, they're in the lab, they are using DNA and they are manipulating genes. But the very fact that, for instance, you can do a certain action against a set of genes or a certain amount of living organism and get a predicted result, right? We may not understand why we get that result. We may not fully understand all of why we get a result, because it seems like it's like you push on this and you get that. That means even if we don't understand it, there are governing rules, principles that enable us to predict what we will get. It's kind of like the weather, right? The weather seems random, but now that we understand, high pressure and the different forces, and we understand, the different geological events that are occurring as far as, with this, the various migration of air masses and all that stuff that occur over certain periods, we can predict. We say, okay, we have this force that goes here. This happens in the ocean. So there are governing principles that enable us to predict when we will have, we may have a dry year, or we may expect more rain. And this is what meteorology is all about. But we are seeing the same thing in biology. We are seeing that if we take these genes and we act on them in a certain way, they don't go off randomly. They behave in a certain pattern. And this is why we can use these things to create medicines and create new substances predictably. So just the fact that we can predict things, predict the behaviors, actually proves my hypothesis that there are governing principles and that these things should be disassociated from anything random. And why is that important again? Because random, that concept of random and evolution, right, it pervades, and it moves our focus away from recognizing intelligent design. Because when we see patterns, we see laws governing, we may not fully understand those things yet, but we can recognize that these things were intelligently designed. Some force intelligently placed these governing, or is in control or designed these governing principles, which enables that predictability. That is so important, because this is, and so what we're seeing now is this sort of scientific principle, which is what this book, Humanity's Inflection Point, it shows that dovetailing of science and religion. How so? Because the knowledge, that information, those revelation came from the same source. I have been skeptical of religion for a long time, but with the revelation, the inspiration that I have received over time, now enables me to recognize, wow, the scriptures came from this source. The revelations and the governing principles that enables all our sciences to be so predictable, they came from the same source. And this is when, I don't know how long it will take, but it requires us to recognize this and recognize the source, so that That's the dovetailing of science and religion. And I know that science unites us. No one argues with computers and medicine. You know, no one argues with that. But we have so messed up religions. We've taken them and we've created cults and clans and my religion. It's like one creator. Science applies to all of us, universally. Gravity, medicine, technology does not discriminate. Religion should be the same. So religion has fallen behind. Science has claimed the leadership that religion should, because the knowledge comes from the same source to make us better, to move us to what our Creator would have us be. And so my hypothesis is so that we can move from that concept of random and over time recognize there are governing principles around everything that we observe, everything that we do. There are governing principles, and they were implemented by our Creator. So I will be doing a lot more as I examine the different animals and plants around us to show the patterns that indicate intelligent design, so that in time, as we coalesce around and recognize this, eventually, and this is information that really, it's where I say that religion should be claiming science, right? Because we had this gap that started, with naturalists. But nature is just the manifestation of God's omnipotence. So when the churches and the religions recognize it's from the same source, our Creator has revealed the keys to the scientific developments that we have made. And that's the coalescing, so that religions will eventually learn from science to unite us globally. Not that we have to have one religion, because diversity is His. As the messages that I have gotten, the key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control, and diversity is His. As servants, we must honor His diversity. Just as He has given us in fauna and flora, all the plants and animals. Yes, we can have different religions, but we recognize the one Creator who has given us the laws of nature, the rules of creation. It's the same thing. The rules of creation are being revealed to us. That's the basis of our sciences. And so this hypothesis of we must observe that there are governing principles that eradicate this concept of random being associated with anything where we can observe patterns. We must recognize the intelligence and the magnificence of our omnipotent Creator. Again, I would say that there is no coincidence that you encounter these episodes and the recognizing God's omnipotence. It's a series of decisions that you made, and so I want you to look at some of those. Pick up a copy of Humanity's Inflection Point, because that will enlighten you to a lot more that I can put into these little episodes in this podcast. And I want to thank you for taking the time to review this, and hopefully we will go on to be that generation that starts, us moving toward this inflection point of bringing us together, a true brotherhood of mankind across the world. I want to thank you once again, and until, may God bless us all. Thanks again.